Hello and welcome to Training in Child Development for Hub Leaders in the National Community Hubs program in South Australia. My name is Lee Goodenough. I will be providing information in this training based on my experience working with children over several years in the context of youth work and child protection, and also in the context of having undertaken some independent study in the area over the past 8 or 9 years. I don't have any academic credentials in the space. I'll be talking about a lot of different fields that relate to child development here, and I don't claim specialist knowledge. All I'm really aiming to do here is provide some general information and ideas related to child development, which will hopefully be helpful in the practice of working with children and families in developing children through playgroups and other developmental environments within your community hub space. So really the purposes of this training are to provide an introduction to theories of child development and to explain some of the contexts for understanding and evaluating child development in practice. This is a huge field, and I'll only touch on a few things briefly. So there's a lot more to discover if you're interested in going into it in depth. Really a key objective of this training is to start to draw some linkages between the theories of child development and practice applications in the real world. There is actually quite a big gap in a lot of theory of child development and the actual practice on the ground of people working with children in a child development oriented way. And it's quite an interesting dynamic, which I noticed some years ago at a conference in Adelaide. It was the Australian Early Development Census Conference of about 2013, where some very prominent international experts were sitting around at the end of the conference for a final question and answer session with questions from the attendees. The very first question that came up was, all of the theory that you've presented in this conference is very useful and interesting, but how do I actually apply this in my setting, working with children in a children's centre? The international experts couldn't give an answer to this question. It simply wasn't within their scope. And what they came up with as a response eventually was, look, we've done this academic research, but it's up to you to work out how to apply this in your context. And that made me realize that there's actually a gap in that area of work. People in universities and research institutes are doing specific research on child development. People in community centres and schools and children's centres and other similar environments are developing programs based on this research to some extent, with the aim of supporting children's development. But the dialogue between the two sides isn't very strong. And so one of the aims of this training will be to explore some of the theories and how we can interpret them in a practical way. I'm not a natural at delivering children's developmental programs. I've seen people who are, so I know the difference. So there are people out there who will know how to do this already without needing so much of the theory. But where it'll help is in if you're wanting to develop a program which is fairly comprehensive and you want to be able to justify your decision making and also critically to be able to involve parents and engage parents in the processes involved in the development work with your children. I'm hoping that this training will help guide some of that activity for you. So there will be points in the training where we have some consideration for the engagement of parents in child development. And also we're wanting to bring this back to children's perspectives at key points. Quite a lot of the time, talking about child development, it's actually possible to forget that children have their own voices and perspectives in this as well. And we want to remain mindful of that throughout. So just giving you a brief outline of what's ahead. After this introduction, we're going to talk about some of the broad themes towards attaining an understanding of child development. There's a lot of, I guess, background information and concepts that we need to think about in order to hold a broad view of child development. Then we're looking at an overview of child development theories and responses, which again is by no means comprehensive. It's a bit of a snapshot of some areas of research and theory. Then we're going to look at understanding the brain, a bit of neuroscience and a bit of the evolution of the mind, and then looking at some psychological approaches to child development. So I think the themes become more interesting and more relevant as they go on. We're starting very broad and very general, and then the last couple of topics, looking at the brain and looking at psychology, we're getting down to the individual mind, the individual personality of each child, and what's going on there. And hopefully this creates a bit of a landscape for you to design and deliver your child development programs and activities.